Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and good evening to everybody. Welcome to this exclusive live broadcast by Islam Media. The time in Johannesburg, South Africa right now, just 1 minute past 7 in the evening. And inshallah, we will be hosting international thought leader, Mr. Wadah Khanfar. We'll go through some of his biography in just a moment or two. But our broadcast today is being shared on One Nation FM in the city of Polokwane, as well as on Al Ansar Radio in Pietermaritzburg and Durban. And hopefully, this will be rebroadcasted in Cape Town on the Voice of the Cape tomorrow evening. We would also like to welcome our viewers on our Facebook page, facebook.com/Salam Media, as well as on our YouTube channel. And you can get that at youtube.com/C/Salam Media. Our discussion tonight will focus on the COVID pandemic and the changes that it has brought to the world. We will also look at the previous world changing moments in history and how people around the globe managed to finally overcome it. And then we take a look at the Muslim world, Muslim leadership, and how do we go forward. But first, let me introduce our guest for tonight, none other than Mr. Wadah Khanfar. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, Wadah, and welcome to the program.
وعليكم السلام ورحمة الله وبركاته. جزاكم الله خيرا. Thank you very much, brother.
All right, just a quick introduction there. Brother Wadah Khanfar is the co-founder of the Sharq Forum and the former Director General of the Al Jazeera Network. He began his career with the network in 1997, covering some of the world's key political zones, including South Africa, Afghanistan, and Iraq. He was appointed the chief of the Baghdad Bureau and later the network's managing director. In 2006, he became the Director General at Al Jazeera and left the network in September 2011. Has been named as one of the Foreign Policy's top 10 100 global thinkers of 2011, as well as one of the Fast Company's most creative business people of the year. He has a diverse academic background with postgraduate studies in philosophy, African studies, and international politics. Brother Wadah, Jazakallah khairan. Thank you so much for making time today to speak to us here through the broadcast waves of Salam Media. It's truly an honor. And we hope that you are in the best of health under these circumstances.
شكرا جزيلا أخي. Thank you very much. I appreciate that.
All right. So as we know that right now the world is stuck in the COVID-19 pandemic, from travel to the economy, simple hug and handshake. Everything seems to have just changed overnight. Can you take the opportunity to talk to us about some of the political and economic changes that have taken place across the globe due to COVID-19?
Thank you very much, and assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. In fact, the most significant thought that I would like to share with you today is for us to imagine the magnitude and the weight of this moment. This moment is one of the most unique moments that our generation and the last two generations before have witnessed. Since the Second World War, I don't know of any event, global one, that is affecting trends of politics, trends of international relations, and trends of economics like the current moment that we are going through. COVID-19 has introduced to the humanity a challenge that goes beyond borders, beyond races, beyond any form of barrier amongst humans, and forcing everyone collectively to adapt to a new reality without any exemption. It does not differentiate between rich or poor, or between those who are living in advanced economies and those who are living in developing countries. Everyone is going to be affected by COVID-19 and the impact of it. Now, in order to understand that, I need to introduce you one important criteria, which it could resolve a lot of issues related to how do we envisage and see the future. The criteria is the following. In order to see what's going to happen in the future, you need to see what was happening before COVID-19, but on a slow motion. And now COVID-19 has intensified that and accelerated that. This is what COVID-19 is doing. It's accelerating and intensifying previous trends in international relations and economics that existed before Corona. So Corona has come in order to change the reality through the same trends, by the way. I can't see new trends, but I see faster, much more accelerated, much more condensed and intensified results of the coronavirus. When you ask me about economy, even before Corona, everyone was expecting that we are heading towards a crisis. But none of us at that time understood exactly or forecast exactly when that crisis is going to happen. But all economists were pessimists about the future and thinking in a year or two, we are going to hit the end of this bubble that has been taking place during the last 15 years or 12 years. And when Corona came, that bubble burst prematurely in a way that the economic crisis, which we are facing right now, which has no precedence in the human history, because now a lot of people are comparing this to 2008, but the comparison, of course, has gone way beyond 2008 economic crisis. Now we are, the comparison right now in the circles of economy is about the 1929 Great Depression, which was the cornerstone of a huge social and economic crisis that led in a few years later on to the Second World War. So that was the reason why the world was going through turbulence, and then the Second World War came as a result of that. At this stage, I can tell you that the only thing that I could see resembling the current crisis is the 1929 Great Depression, not the 2008 or any other recession that the economy has faced.
So if we are saying that, the possible outcome of 1929 led to the Second World War, what are we foreseeing or predicting? Allah alone knows what will happen in the future. But in terms of the political situation and movements, do we see more chaos, more tension and clashes occurring?
Again, let me go back to the trends that existed in geopolitics and international relations. Before COVID-19, we have witnessed that there is a major shift of power from the West to the East, and that was consistently happening during the last few years. So China did rise as an economic superpower, but it did not have a geopolitical or military capabilities to be classified within the category of the United States of America. Economically, it did compete or start to compete with America, but when it comes to the other criterias, in order to classify a superpower, you don't want to have only economy, but you need to have as well the possibility of that nation to coerce, to make sure that they can enforce their vision, their lifestyle, their way of thinking on the world. The Americans did that. Before them, the British did that. Before the British, the Spanish did that. Before the Spanish, the Ottomans did that. So if you take the last 4 centuries, for example, we had the Ottoman civilization, and the Ottoman in the 16 and half of the 17 were the leading superpower of the world. So people way of thinking about politics, economics, even social life was heavily affected by the Ottoman way of thinking and economy and so on. Then after that, the Spanish discovered Latin America, and they started bringing the gold and silver, and they became superpower, and they did replace the Ottomans on the top of the pyramid of international relations, and they became the richest and the most powerful empire during the 17th and 18th century. And then after that, the British came, they defeated the Spanish in the in the war, in Napoleonic wars, but also they replaced the Spanish in the top of the pyramid until the First World War, when the Americans came and they replaced the British and they became the superpower of the world. So if you think about this, it means like 100 years to 150 years, there is a cycle whereby a civilization or an empire within the constraints of international politics becomes the superpower. Now, the Americans have been the superpower since the Second World War, 1945. Now, the crisis that is happening during the last few years, that China is rising economically, but China has never been interested in going out to dominate. In a sense, the Americans do have hundreds, but thousands actually, of military bases across the world. The Americans control the high seas, control the international trade routes, security. They are the most advanced when it comes to controlling the security and intelligence apparatuses across the world. The Chinese never have been involved in that. The Chinese have been centered around China. The America have been centered around themselves, but they are dominating in the world as well. Now, the new case that we see in front of us is very unique one, where economically China has become advanced, and the Americans saw that the Chinese are becoming advanced in their economy, and they felt threatened, and now they are trying to use whatever left of their power, and I mean by power, their soft power in the case of media and Hollywood and everything else, the hard power in the case of military, which is very obvious to me that the Americans will never hesitate to use a military in order to trim the Chinese ascending to power. And they are using the international tools of the World Bank and IMF and the whatever international tools are available in order to reduce the inevitable, which is the Chinese rising. Now, where that will lead us, this is the discussion of the moment. I mean, if anyone would like to describe what Corona has done to us, it has accelerated the trend of weakening the Americans and empowering the Chinese so far. We don't know, of course. A lot of things are happening at this stage. We are in a state of flux. The international relations are shaking. You use the word anarchy and chaos. I can tell you the chaotic international order started 3 years ago, but now it is official that the Americans have lost the top of the pyramid, and they are trying their best to continue to be there, whatever they could use in order to sustain themselves. But I can assure you that the situation is not really working for the Americans, given the current crisis, which is also another result of COVID-19, the current rise of violence in America, the current protests, because the current protest is not only about George Floyd. It is an accumulation of apartheid in a way, in the discrimination in the United States of America, the injustice. It has been triggered now at this moment, where people have become actually unemployed, scared about the future, lost hope in the system. And all of that was triggered by George Floyd incident. And now we see the American society going into this state of protests against the police and against the establishment.
So right on top of it, we see a clash between the United States and a powerful country like China, perhaps replacing them economically and politically, and the US fighting for its life. But what about countries one rung lower? Where do the Russians, for example, fit into all of this? The Indian giant that is beginning to rise, the Arab countries as a bloc altogether, where do they fit in? Where will Africa and a country like South Africa in particular also fit into this political gamble?
Thank you. This is a very good question. Now let me go back to the world order itself. The concept of the world order started in Eurasia, basically the European Asian terrain, which means, Europe in the case of Spain, and the case of course the Portuguese, the case of course I'm speaking about history, and the British later on, but also you have the Ottomans on the other side, and you have the Russians trying to achieve certain kind of geopolitical interest for Russia for the last 5 centuries. But let us start by Russia. During the last 5 centuries, the Russians have been desperately trying to reach to the warm waters, because Russia is surrounded by oceans, but most of them, all of them are cold, freezing, 6 months. Some of them freeze for 6 months and they cannot trade. So the geopolitical interest of Russia has been, since Peter the Great, to reach to areas where water does not freeze. That is the Black Sea. Now, the Black Sea has been a lake, an Ottoman lake, in the 15th, 16th, 17th century. And therefore, they were deprived from that kind of interest that they have seen for themselves. This is why they fought against the Ottomans 13 wars in order to reach to the Crimea and to the Black Sea and to establish a navy in the Black Sea. And the last war was in 1854, the Crimea War, when all Europe, united with the Ottomans, prevented the Russians from reaching to the Black Sea and reaching to the Mediterranean. Why I'm saying this? Because last month we have witnessed a geopolitical shift, a tremendous shift, which the Russians have been trying to achieve for the last 5 centuries, whereby they have established an airbase in Libya, in the northern part of Africa, in the southern part of the Mediterranean, across the road from Italy, across the road from Europe, and no one can kick them out from there. They have now 19 air jets in Libya, jet fighters, and they are now increasing their presence militarily in Libya. That's unbelievable. Europeans have been waging war after war to prevent the Russians from reaching to the Mediterranean. Russia now is in 2 bases in the Mediterranean, one in Syria and one in Libya. The second one, the Ottomans have been deprived from the military navy. Of course, during the 17th, 18th century, they had major pressure on them. Today, the Turks as well have strong presence militarily in Libya again and in Syria. So the Mediterranean today has much more Russian and Turkish influence than European influence. This is unbelievable geopolitical change. And that would have never happened if the world order was not going through this transition and going through this chaotic relationships amongst the major fighting powers, which is in this case the United States of America and China. The clash between the major powers is very good for regional powers and very good for marginal powers, because when there is a clash between superpowers, the weaker could find much better opportunity to adopt more forceful relationship with others and to expand their presence and their hegemony. In my opinion, Turkey is winning out of this crisis. In my opinion, the Russians as well are winning out of this crisis. And to a large extent, the Arab world, unfortunately, at this stage is frozen in time because our leadership are not strategic enough to think collectively, and they are still fighting each other like a tribal system rather than state system, and they cannot take the moment. I mean, this moment is very precious. It is a golden moment for the weak. It's a golden moment for the margin to start adopting much better policy. But unfortunately, in the Arab world, we don't have that leadership that has that vision that could really bring together certain forces in order to advance our cause. Iran might use it, and they are going to use it, but the only problem with Iran is economy is actually going through a major crisis. The sanctions have crippled them, and of course, COVID-19 also was a major crisis for the economy, another extra one. So Turkey is economically much better than Iran, of course. Military of Turkey has proven in Syria and in Libya that they are doing marvelous job when it comes to drones that have been super influential in defining who is winning the battle, and they have won. Now West Libya is in the hand of the Turks, East Libya practically in the hand of the Russians, and these are the two powers that define the future of Libya. And if you define the future of Libya, you may define the future of North Africa. You may become superpower regional superpower when it comes to defining the balance of power. Now, coming to India, you ask about India.
Yes,
India cannot compete with China for many reasons. One of them, they don't have the central, relationships that could, China for the last 2,000 or 3,000 years, since 222 BC, they have adopted a centralized governance that control everything in China. Now, India is too fragmented for that, religiously, and the caste system and many other social issues. They have created a lot of contradictions within the Indian society. Therefore, I don't foresee India standing against China as a rival, but it could be very important in the war between America and China, the economic war. Because if you witness what happened the last few weeks when the clashes in the northern part of India, southern part of China, on the Tibet region started between India and China, the Americans are the happiest people in the world. Why? They would love to use India, and they will use also other allies to make China suffer. But will India replace China? They will definitely get some benefits out of the war against China, because a lot of factories might migrate to India from China, especially after the current crisis that we are facing. They might be also getting some favorable treatment by international institutions in order to restrain China. But I don't think that India at this stage, given the bureaucracy of India, given the kind of economy India has, is going to really be equal in power to China. China definitely in Asia will continue to be power number one. Now, the last question you asked me about Africa, Africa, unfortunately, is going also through transformation. So the current economic system that the world has adopted, the new liberal economic system, has enforced policies on Africa and on most of the developing countries, the margin, in order to abuse rather than to help and support their rise to prosperity. So the greed that the Western new liberal economic system has prevented social justice, has prevented equilibrium in the system of economy, and therefore we are paying the price. In Africa, we have been paying the price. And it seems to me, and this is very clear now, when COVID-19 came and affected the rich, everyone rushed to develop vaccine. But when we have been suffering in Africa from AIDS for decades now, no one was rushing to develop AIDS because they have seen it something that affects others, not the wealthy and rich and powerful. So this to tell you that the international system that was built during the last few decades after the Second World War has favored the rich and has abused the margin and the poor, and has increased greed, and has also made a lot of wealth on the backs of the Africans and the backs of the other nations like Latin Americans and some of the Asian countries. So what I'm saying is, if this economic structure is collapsing now, or if it is going to collapse in the future, we need to envisage a new way as Africans of developing an economic stability, far from being attached to the world economy in a sense of this bubble. We need a solid economic growth based on agriculture, based on proper mining, and based on added value, not only sending to the rich countries our minerals to be used in their factories, but we need to start doing this in our countries. We need to start educating our people to use whatever raw material we have in order to develop it into proper products that others in the world could use. And this is a major challenge. I don't see it happening right now, but I see a lot of positive examples in Africa happening here and there, but it will take some time, and it might, during the process, take some suffering as well from Africa and some of other poor nations as well.
Yes, you are listening to this live broadcast on the Salam Media satellite radio broadcast and online on our website, salammedia.com/listen-live. You could also be tuned in via One Nation FM or Al Ansar out in Durban and Peter Maritzburg. And this is also going out on our Facebook page and YouTube channel. Now, what that just a minute ago, or a few minutes ago, you were talking about the rise of regional powers such as Russia and Turkey and the moves that they've made in Libya. But do you think there could be a possibility of a clash between these two upcoming giants, and that could also be a possible point of tension?
No, I would say the following. From the experience that the Russians and the Turks have or had in Turkey, and sorry, in Syria, there was a moment of almost military clash between the two powers in Idlib, if you remember, just like 3 months ago. So what happened then when these two countries found that they are almost now hitting each other? Definitely the concept of nation state for both, always I'm saying the Russians know exactly that they are a nation state that has its own interest, and the Turks know that they are a nation state that has its own interest. There is a sense of maturity when you are thinking of the interest of the state. While in the Arab world, for example, people think of the interest of the royal families, the interest of the leaders, not the state. So in the case of Russia and the case of Turkey, they know the boundaries. I mean, everyone now is testing these boundaries in Libya. So the Turkish-backed forces are on the verge of invading a city called Sirte in the middle of Libya, while the Russians are saying that Sirte is a red line. So at this moment, exactly, we have reached the end of the test that both countries are trying to enforce on each other. What is going to happen in the next few days? I forecast that they will sit together. I think that the Russians and the Turks in Libya will sit together and they will sponsor a way forward where they can bring all the Libyan factions together and define new game, the boundaries of the new game in Libya, where the two countries will continue to exist, but at the same time, they will coexist as well. The Americans have been, during the last few days, insisting that the Russians should leave Libya. And Pompeo, the day before yesterday, or yesterday actually, he said that the Russians should leave. But why the Russians will leave? I mean, the Russians cannot leave Libya because they have achieved for themselves very strategic goal that they have been trying to do for a long, long time. So in my opinion, they will continue to be there. Turkey cannot leave because Turkey has a geopolitical reasons to stay in Libya. Turkey has signed with the Libyan government an agreement to establish a maritime corridor between Turkey and Libya. And that maritime corridor established for the first time a passage for Turkish ships through the Mediterranean without going through the Greek territories, the waters, or the zone between Israel and Turkey and Egypt. And the current situation in the Eastern Mediterranean, I mean the Eastern Mediterranean, the area between Turkey, Israel, and between all of them and Egypt and Greece is heating up. And this is the flashpoint that everyone must look at. What's going to happen? Because also Turkey is trying to establish that corridor and maintain it, and is trying to start explorations of oil and gas in the Mediterranean. While the Greek and the Israelis and the Egyptians have been saying that the waters that the Turks are trying to explore in belong to them. So inevitably, we are going to have some clashes. Yesterday, actually, some Greek ships, military ships, did create some troubles for some Turkish ship as well. And then eventually they didn't clash, but at least that was an indication of severe tension happening in the region. So Turkey will not leave Libya because of many reasons like that. Russia will not leave Libya because of many reasons like that. So the only solution for both of them is sit together and define the boundaries of everyone's presence in Libya.
Staying in that region, we see the Israelis now looking towards the annexation of the West Bank and taking over much of the land there. We've had a record number of Jews from outside of Israel registering in the Israeli army as was published in the Haaretz newspaper or online broadcast just a day or two ago. What is Israel actually preparing for, and how does that threaten its neighbors? Firstly, on the eastern side, Jordan.
So the Israelis believe, especially the Israeli administration, Netanyahu government, that they are going through the golden moment in their relationship or relationships in the region. Why? Because at this stage, they are telling everyone that you are our friends. I mean, the Saudis, the Emiratis, the Egyptians, everyone else is trying to tell the Israelis that we are close to you, and this is because of the weakness of Arab leadership actually at this moment in time, or some of them at least, and also because everyone was trying to please the Trump administration. So during this period, when Israel has Trump in power and Jared Kushner, and has at the same time some leaders in the Middle East who are trying to be cozy with them, they have achieved a lot. They have achieved the annexation of the Golan Heights. They have achieved the American recognition of Al-Quds or Jerusalem to be the capital of Israel. They have achieved the green light from the Americans to go ahead and to annex Jordan Valley and some territories inside West Bank where the settlements are. And this is most likely what they are going to do in the next few weeks, or they are at least threatening to do. Now, in my opinion, that might happen or might not happen. It depends on it depends on the domestic Israeli politics, not on the pressure that the Arabs are putting on the Israelis, unfortunately. Why? Because no one is putting any pressure on the Israelis at this moment in time. So they are actually now free to do whatever they want to do. And the major debate is happening inside Israel about this issue. What will happen? What will happen in the next few days will define the future of the conflict. Why? Israel has been trying to digest the territories and the population. So in 1948 areas, when the Israelis occupied 1948 areas, we have Arabs, Palestinians who continue to exist there. We have more than 2 million now who are Palestinians living inside the 1948 areas. And those Arabs or Palestinians have been going through a lot of cultural and political manipulation in order to make them fit within the state. But until now, the Arabs or the Palestinians in 1948 area, they continue to have the identity and the culture and everything that belongs to the Palestinians. So they cannot really create that feeling that, okay, now we are not anymore Arabs. So now they are moving into West Bank. And if they are going to move into West Bank, they are also including in this process a lot of Arab population. And again, a lot of people in Israel are worried about this concept, not because they don't want to annex the land, but they don't want the population. The dream of Israel is to get the land, but not the population. But under the current circumstances, it might be difficult. This is why they have a lot of dispute about the annexation. Now, we in the region, I mean the Arab countries in the region, at this stage have not established any proper discourse about this issue. They have not put any pressure on the Israelis to abandon this. No power in the world so far, especially the Americans, have expressed any concern about this issue. It is an Israeli issue, unfortunately. Now, will this do good to Israel? I don't think so. If the Israelis are smart, and they will not do this step, because eventually they are implicating themselves in a dispute in the future where they will never be able to resolve. In my opinion, the Israelis have failed dismally to achieve any balance within the territory from the sea to the river, and they have failed to establish any security after all the might of power and intelligence that they have. And now they are increasing the vulnerability more on a strategic level rather than decreasing their vulnerability. The Israelis have not decided if they would like to be part of the region or to be just an entity in the region. What Israel is moving to establish right now is proper apartheid, based on the fact that the population are discriminated against, but the land is belonging to them. This is what we have seen in South Africa, and this is what the Israelis are going to implement and implementing right now. First class, second class, third class citizens based on their race, and the territory, the land, it means, is under their sovereignty. This is a proper apartheid entity that we are seeing day after day consolidated in Palestine.
And then I want to take a look at what's going on in Saudi Arabia, the royal family, and also the relationship with a country like Turkey to the Saudis and the broader Arab world. There seems to be a dichotomy, a split between those who are, closing up and maintaining their relations with the Turks, while some, the UAE, Saudi Arabia, and Egypt perhaps, are drifting further and further away.
The logic of a strategy will tell you that the Saudis should be allies with the Turks. This is basically what should have happened. It means that the Saudis, who have designated Iran as their regional threat, they should have thought of Turkey as the Sunni ally that they need to be close to in order to establish links and to empower themselves. But unfortunately, this did not happen at all. The Saudi government, especially the government of the Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman at this stage, has one consistent strategic goal: to please the Americans internationally and the Israelis regionally. Unfortunately, they don't have in mind something that could establish an order in the region that could create stability for everyone in the region. So this is why they made major mistakes during the last few years. The war with Yemen is one of them, which has drained the resources of Saudi Arabia and created a lot of misery for the Yemenis. The second one, the siege of Qatar, the blockade that they are trying for the last few years to impose on Qatar, which has no logic. It has no strategic vision about it. It's just something that should have never happened if anyone has proper strategic thinking. The third one, they have been very cozy to the Israelis more than any other state in the region, and they have been trying to, through the Israelis, to secure American supported help for anything they're doing. The fourth one, they have destroyed the Gulf Council, the Cooperation Council. I mean, GCC is a council that has been operating, at least not a huge operation, but at least they have some kind of agreements. But while they are putting blockade in Qatar and pushing everyone to their maximum limit, I think GCC is now dead officially. So they have lost their strategic depth, which should have been sustained if they really regard Iran to be their threat. But they have, as I said, all kinds of mistakes have been committed, all kinds of sins in the strategic sense have been committed, and they couldn't do anything that could really secure their boundaries. And we see this in Yemen. Now, the fight sometimes in southern Saudi Arabia rather than in Yemen. They couldn't do prosperity as well. The decline of economic reality in Saudi Arabia as a result of the decline of oil price, and the result as well of massive corruption and massive, lack of strategy on how to establish stable economy and diversified economy. All of these kind of mistakes make me feel that the future of the kingdom is not going to be very stable and secure on short run. And this, of course, is a huge challenge for everyone in the region. And unfortunately, the Saudis have been under the Trump administration abuse, basically, in a sense, because the Trump administration is charging them for everything they are doing in the region, and they are sucking every important asset that the Saudis have.
Yes, you are listening to this live broadcast on Salam Media, as well as on Al Ansar in Durban and Pietermaritzburg, One Nation FM out in Polokwane, and our Facebook page, facebook.com/Salam Media, as well as on YouTube on the Salam Media channel. And we are speaking to none other than Wadah Khanfar, the president of the Sharq Forum and the former director general of the Al Jazeera News Network. Now, Wadah, you are giving us a long list of mistakes and errors that the Saudis have made as the kingdom. But what about the Saudi Arabian street? How are people reacting to these blunders that they've made? Is there a possibility of change coming about due to these mistakes that have now already passed us?
Everyone who matters, everyone who has an opinion or has some serious thought about the future is in jail right now. I mean, no one of us should forget that when some smart, intelligent, well-educated journalist called Jamal Khashoggi started expressing another way of thinking about the situation in Saudi Arabia, he was killed and he was slaughtered and dismembered in the consulate of his country in Istanbul, and everyone knows about that. So this is what could happen to Jamal Khashoggi, who was working for the Washington Post. Imagine what have happened to other journalists or other thought leaders. Imagine what happened to Salman al-Ouda, who is in jail for the last few years without any proper accusation. What could have happened to all the economists and all the writers and intellectuals and proper ulama who stood for Saudi Arabia and the future of Saudi Arabia and the tradition? All of these people right now are in jail, or some of them have been killed, some of them are in exile. So unfortunately, the Saudis have gone beyond any expectation in fighting against anyone who is not opposition. I'm not talking about opposition. Saudis, these people like Salman Ouda and Jamal Khashoggi and others, they were not really opposition. They were just expressing concern about the policies of the Saudi government, and they were giving advice to how could some economic and political issues be handled. They found themselves in jail. Some of them, they don't know why they found themselves in jail. Some of them, they went to jail just because they were popular, because they have good communication with the public. So it seems to me that the Saudis have decided not only to punish people because they speak or they are vocal, they punish people because they are silent as well. Some of these ulama went to jail because they did not express open support to Mohammed bin Salman on certain policies, and they found themselves in jail. And this is unique. I mean, we say always people go to jail because they speak. In Saudi Arabia, even if you keep silent, also, you need to go to jail unless if you are full of praise and full of propaganda to the regime. Unfortunately.
All right, so we undoubtedly can see that there are huge global changes that were almost scheduled to take place, and that COVID-19 just pushed ahead and hastened the time span or shortened the time span in front of us. But there have been other world events that have also shifted global perspective, changed powers in recent years. 9/11, for example, about 19 years ago, was one such incident. And then the world almost seems to have continued. Do you think the world will continue after COVID-19 as business as usual, or will there be major changes to be expected?
No, the world will continue, of course, no doubt about this, but not business as usual. In a sense, what? You mentioned the 11th September. 11th September was massive point in the world order structure because it was actually a moment when the Americans wanted to express their total hegemony on the system. In 1991, we have major collapse of the Soviet Union, and then the Americans were crowned the only superpower in the world. And since then, they tried to shape the economic system by establishing the World Trade Organization or by also establishing security establishments all over the world to crown themselves the supreme eternal power of the world. Unfortunately, or fortunately, that's impossible to happen because, as I told you, we have seen many other powers before the Americans presiding over that system called the International World Order, and they went away. So this is a cycle that happens in history, and it will never. The Americans will not be exception. But they made a major mistake in after 11 September when they waged war against Afghanistan, and they waged war against Iraq after that 2003. 2001 and 2003 were major mistakes done by the American administration. They were blinded by their might, military might, and they used it without any reasoning. Why? Because while the major threat to the American supremacy was coming from China and Russia, they started waging ghost wars in Afghanistan, people hiding in caves, and people in the desert of Iraq. Neither Afghanistan nor Iraq are real strategic threat to the United States of America. And later on, while they were busy in long war without an end in Afghanistan or in Iraq, the Chinese and the Russians were building their economy, were restoring their strength and power. So the best thing happened to the Chinese and to the Russians is the war against so-called terrorism that kept the Americans fighting ghost wars while the two countries are building themselves and re-establishing their hegemony. Now, the Americans, when they realized during the time of Obama that major mistake, they started shifting their strategic priorities to Southeast Asia and to the South China Sea, and they started even sending their military to that direction because they found that China has grown beyond any expectation. And since then, they are now facing that current challenge. So the Americans have made major strategic mistake because of that might. That might, it means that huge military might that they could not balance it with proper thinking. And when you are massively powerful, you are doomed to make mistakes because you cannot estimate the consequences of the future. And therefore, they did not actually estimate that they are going today to sit against China and to sit against Russia, while Russia is filling the void in the Middle East, and while China is expanding through the new Silk Road that they're establishing and their economic relationships with everyone in the world. The Americans feel angry, frustrated, reactionary, and the World Trade Organization that was built by the Americans to establish an American-centered globalism is now weakened by the Americans because they found that the Chinese are actually building or benefiting from globalization, economic globalization, more than the Americans, and which is very contradictory in terms because the Chinese are led by Communist Party, which is supposed to be a model of socialism, but they are actually at this stage the biggest capitalist nation, and the Americans are shocked, and this is why there are a lot of ironies happening at this moment in time, and the Americans are losing nerves. They are losing balance. I mean, if you look at what is happening in America right now, there is no consensus almost on anything, including the relationship with China, including the relationship with the Middle East. I mean, what is funny, yesterday, for example, Mr. Erdogan, the president of Turkey, he made a call with Putin, with Trump, and he said in a statement that we have reached to total agreement on Libya. And the president of Egypt, Abdel Fattah al-Sisi, also did call Trump. And Abdel Fattah al-Sisi is standing exactly in the opposite direction of Turkey. He also made a call to Trump, and he said also that he reached a total agreement on Libya. So you can't agree with Abdel Fattah al-Sisi and Erdogan unless the center of power in the White House has lost the way of handling things. And there is no one, I think, in the Washington knows exactly the direction. This is why I feel the next few weeks towards the American elections will find even much more contradictions emerging between the military establishment, like the Pentagon and the CIA and others, and the White House. And we see the polarization is not only happening in the street, but also is happening within the establishment. The Americans have never seen a moment like this in their history.
Now, finally, Wadah, as we come to the last few moments of this wonderful interview with you, the Muslim Ummah and the fragmented state that it is in right now, we see it pulling in every direction that you can imagine. Amid all of the chaos and the political changes and the economy is going up and down and world superpowers being replaced as we speak, where does the Ummah find itself? Where should we be going? What direction should we be heading? And what advice can you offer?
Unfortunately, my brother, the Ummah at this stage is going through major problem. Strategically, from the big picture doesn't look great. Why? So before, we used to have major problems with the West, and this problem used to happen because of serious Western intervention in our land, and their pressure on us to adopt their own interest rather than our interest. But unfortunately, during the last few years as well, we have started to face major problem with some Asian countries, like China, which has made major atrocities against Muslim minorities in China, and also India. And when you have China and India and the Rohingya crisis and so on, and that has never been the case before, because Asia has not been actually taking a hostile attitude against Muslim. But unfortunately, right now, we have that happening at this stage. What could the Muslims do at this stage? In my opinion, we need center of power. At this stage, the Muslims do not have any center of power that could come together and think collectively. Before, we used to have initiatives like the Islamic Conference Organization, which is almost now dead. It does not really exist, even in the form of any kind of performance. And also, we need, I mean, there was an attempt a few months ago in December to establish a group of countries: Pakistan, Malaysia, Indonesia, Turkey, Qatar, Iran, to come together and start thinking for the Ummah how to reduce the conflict inside the Ummah and try to secure some of the minorities and so on. But unfortunately, that was ruined, the meeting, not because of these countries, but because of the intervention of Saudi Arabia and the intervention of the Emiratis and the pressure on Pakistan not to join, the pressure on Indonesia not to change. And that initiative was not really born as strong as everyone would like it to be born. As long as we don't have a center of power, a geopolitical center that could start thinking collectively, then eventually it will be in the hand of Muslims, ordinary organizations, non-state actors, civil society groups, ulama councils, the Ummah institutions, to start thinking about it. And in my opinion, it might be useful for us to say this for ourselves and to act against it, about it, that states have failed us and the states are not going to do much given the current circumstances. People have to wake up to the fact that we need to develop proper cooperation amongst ourselves. We need to have an alliance amongst those who are dreaming of justice, equality, freedom in the Islamic world. They should network with each other, and they should network with the world. We should not have only a Muslim network. We need to have everyone who is fighting for social justice, wherever he is, should become part of this network. Everyone who is fighting for the rights of the oppressed, wherever they are, should become part of this. This is why I'm calling for an international coalition of those who fight for or struggle for justice, equality, liberty, freedom, to come together and start taking the opportunity, not to leave it in the hand of governments, because I don't think that if we are going to wait for governments, the governments are not going to move very quickly or very fast in the next few years to come.
Jazakallah khairan, Brother Wadah. Just one question that has come through via our Facebook page from Zaid Jadwat, a young man out in the KwaZulu-Natal area. He says, can we perhaps get some analysis on the media under US President Trump's administration? How have you viewed their coverage and their portrayal of what's happening?
So I must say that the American media has been very vocal from the beginning, most of it, of course. We have polarization in America. So if you are watching Fox News, it has its own pro-Trump policies. And if you watch CNN, it has its own also view, which is exactly opposite to that. So the polarization in the media is huge, and it has never reached this, this moment. Some of the time, sometimes I envy the Americans that they have freedoms to talk, because in other countries, especially where in the Arab world in general, it's difficult for anyone to express his opinion. But also, on the other hand, it shows you to what extent this president has polarized the society, and to what extent now there is major conflict happening between the establishment and the major, capitalist, neoliberal forces in the United States of America and the Trump administration, which is not unique, and it's because Trump has followers. Trump has solid support from certain sectors of the society, built on white nationalism, which it might be consolidated because of the current Black Matters campaign. And in my opinion, this is not going to do good to the Americans, but it will definitely weaken the status of America internationally. And once that happens, the new world order the world order will shift towards much better maybe situation, because I have not been a great advocate of the American dominance in the world, and I think the Americans made major mistakes, and especially in our region, they have destroyed a lot, including the Arab Spring, which was actually a great opportunity for the Arabs to move forward and to abandon the crisis that they have been going through for 100 years. But I think the Americans and many other international powers did support counter-revolutionary forces and gave them the green light to destroy the hope of the new generation to move on. So the current reality in America is complicated, and the media has played major role in creating awareness on one hand, but also creating polarization on the other hand.
Brother Wadah Khanfar, Jazakallah Khair, and thank you so much for sharing your valuable time with us. We really, really appreciate it, the deep insight into COVID-19 and its repercussions around the world. We look forward to your visit soon to South Africa once all of these travel bans are lifted.
Inshallah.
Jazakallah Khair, and you go well.
Thank you very much, Akhi. Shukran. Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Yes, that brings us to the end of this broadcast. It's been a pleasure being in your company. I'll be back at the studio once again tomorrow morning, 8 a.m. sharp for the News and Views show. Please do tune in. Until then, from me, Azhar Wali, fi amanillah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.